Welcome to Built Together, the podcast where design, technology, and leadership meet to shape the spaces where we work, learn, and connect in. In every episode, you'll hear from architects, engineers, technologists, and innovators who are breaking down the silos and rethinking how we create spaces that truly bring people together. Because great spaces aren't just about the plans or the tech, they're about the people. And it's what's possible when we build together. Thank you, and welcome to Build Together. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Built Together podcast. This podcast is all about collaboration, all things collaboration, and how we as designers, as technology professionals, as human beings can come together and collaborate better. Joining us today is none other than Dr. Jodie Penrod. Dr. Jodie Penrod is the CIO of Marshall University and a pioneer and a thought leader in the ALC, which is Active Learning Classroom. And so we are so grateful to have you here today, Dr. Penrod, and thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks, Xavier. I'm happy to be here and excited to talk with you.
Really excited to have you on because you've been someone that has fascinated me with your work, not only at Marshall University, but even previously at Ohio University. And I've really just been impressed by not only your knack for bringing to bear some of the latest technology in the classroom environment, but even the university's willingness to take that step in active learning classrooms and in the future learning spaces. And I think that it's a topic that is really kind of important right now, right? Especially with all of the things that are happening in higher education, all of the changes that are being made, the different considerations that we have to think about, not only as professionals in higher education, but for me as a parent, right, with my children going into school. I think that it's a very kind of pressing conversation and one that needs to be had. And so I think I really want to know for you, what kind of led you down this path, right? Not just the technology path, but being a technology professional within the higher education space. Like what first fascinated you with, technology in higher education, and then what led you to the active learning and active classroom environment?
Yeah, I would say over my career, everything's been a little bit of a happy accident that's led me to the next step. I have an undergraduate and graduate degree in engineering. So I was always really passionate about solving problems for people. And engineering is really just solving a problem at the end of the day. And that's the
Right.
beauty about being in IT is that you're continuously solving problems with technology. So I've always been super passionate about that. I actually had the opportunity to move into higher education. It's been almost 10 years now. I was working in healthcare, actually healthcare technology, which is a little bit of a different animal than higher ed.
Right, yeah.
Um, and I was recruited into being the senior director of technology for Ohio University's Heritage College of Osteopathic Medicine, which I lovingly call HCOM. A lot of people know that by OU's HCOM, which is their multi-campus College of Osteopathic Medicine. Um, the problems they were trying to solve were building a new Heritage College building in the Athens campus and then modernizing their classroom infrastructure with that build because all of their curriculum was connected between 3 different campuses. So that was
Mm.
really like my first assignment when I went to OUHCOM and trying to figure out how do we connect 3 campuses. Now they were already doing it. They were doing something very cool very early on before it became the thing to do with COVID. So
Right.
they were essentially using a Polycom bridge server and had 3 different classrooms that they were connecting and sharing content. And their technology team was essentially a portion of it was a production team. The reason why I was hired into that role is because at that point in time, I had a lot of software application experience, and the chief financial officer who this role reported to, she had an IT background and knew that that was sort of the skill gap that they had because they already had
Sure.
they really had a great AV team. They just really needed somebody that was strong on the application side. Enter my role into this position, and to my shock, I then became somebody that was really interested in AV as well. So not only did I have the
Right.
software side, I then started learning more on the AV side as we started the construction of the building. And the rest is history, as they say from then on out. That was my foundation and start into higher ed. And here I am today for Marshall University. It's been a great experience, and I love being on a college campus. There's no better environment than being in a college campus. So I think I finally have found my fit and my place in life.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, and
Yeah.
I kind of echo that statement. I think when you step into the college classroom of today, it really takes a shape of it looks like a production studio, right?
Hmm.
I know that for me, kind of growing up, I didn't really appreciate that as much as I do today as a technology professional. And you mentioned something that I think was very fascinating in that you started with the software knowledge, kind of software background
Hmm.
and engineering, which are all really interesting ways to fall into AV, right?
Hmm.
I think if you speak to any AV professional, none of us really kind of like went to school and said, I'm going to study audiovisual design or like I'm going to study this and make it a career. It was always a bit of an adjacent pathway that brought us to it. And I find that even in higher education spaces, for a very long time, it was the mindset was that AV and IT were different and
Hmm.
that they were two separate two separate pieces of the puzzle, and that those things really didn't kind of come together. And now I think more and more of that is changing. You really can't have the conversation of AV without an IT component because a lot of things
Right.
are being done over the network. Universities are the campuses are massive now, and these campuses have to be connected at the same time as they continue to grow. And that kind of brings me to my next question for you. In your role at CIO, or as a CIO, I'm sorry, at Marshall University, what does collaboration kind of look like for you all in a day to day? Like, what does that look like? For the faculty and the departments that you oversee, the students in that department, as well as the IT teams. What does that collaboration kind of look like today?
It's all across the board, really. I think, let me speak about students first. I think students, we're noticing after the COVID era, like there is, everybody is coming back to campus. However,
Sure.
students now expect that if they are sick, or if they have a conflicting event, or if they have a family issue or whatever, even if they're on campus students, they expect to be able to join their class remotely, you know?
Right.
And so that's where I feel like the expectation of our students have changed, that even, we do have online students that are online, but we have on-campus students that want to have some sort of preference, right, about how they
Mm,
attend class. So I think that there's that expectation now of being able to have a little bit more convenience in attending class. And then, as far as collaboration on the faculty and staff side, we have seen, I don't know about you, but I don't hardly ever go to in-person meetings anymore. It's very rare to be
it's
on an
very rare.
in-person.
Yeah.
Most people are on Teams or Zoom or something like that. So you're really seeing, I would say, less of a collaboration room, conference room type of gathering anymore, and it's much more in a Teams or a Zoom environment. But on the student and learning side, I think you're seeing more and more importance on that collaboration technology inside of the classroom.
Right. Yeah, and I think that even in our work environments, much of the habits that we've built today, especially around conferencing and collaboration, were kind of exacerbated by COVID.
Mhm.
And people got used to working remote or being on a video call or video chat. But the truth is that, and this is maybe a bit controversial to say, but there's real estate out there and there's people who own this real estate who need that real estate occupied. And so there will be, I feel like, a drive to go back into the office, much like there is a really big push for students to go back into in-person learning. It's to me, it's more about community building, and people just some of us, maybe okay with not never having to deal with anyone and just kind of working from our office. But I think there is a piece of us as well that really kind of enjoy going into the office, or having those types of conversations or collaborating in that way. And I think for students, it's that much more important, because that's where they're going. If they know that the rest of the time in their professional work journeys, they're going to be sitting in their home, the place that they're going to make those connections and actually have human interaction is going to be in that classroom or on that
Right.
campus. And so I think that it's important that campuses, at least for me, really kind of focus on how do we ensure that this is kind of it's happening in a way that is inclusive of everyone, and considering all different learning types. And with that, for you all, can you kind of explain, you know, why like high flex environments matter? You joined a campus that already had a process and some
Mhm.
technology that was working well. But for you, why does high flex matter, and what problem were you trying to solve in your effort?
Yeah, so first I want to say, like, I think, people hear the word high flex and it means a lot of different things to different people, but there is a standard definition for high flex. And I'm less of a proponent of using the word high flex than I am using the word hybrid. So,
Sure.
high flex brings in then that third asynchronous model. And I think, like, for me and my focus as I think about classrooms, it's much more on the synchronous ability to have a class, and whether that synchronous ability is with remote students or in-person students, and being able to mix the two together, right?
Mhm.
So I really focused on the hybrid experience. So, as we're recruiting so many different types of students, we have students that are non-traditional students that have jobs. So we need to be able to open access for everyone and be inclusive for everyone. And I think the word inclusive is, that can mean many different people, but I think overall it's just having something be accessible to someone. So
Sure.
if you're somebody that wants to work and, attend class in a synchronous way online and still have an equitable experience in the person in the room, that's really what our goals should be, right? And so with that being said, from an AV standpoint, what's really important is, number one, the audio is good. I mean, how many times have
Right.
we tried? And, I think when I came to Marshall University, the classrooms were working, but I don't know that they were working well from a hybrid standpoint, right? So, and I
Sure.
think that that's our focus is, like, I think a lot of people during the COVID time really focused on things working. I don't know that they focused on things working well. And so now, as we're in,
Very
like,
true.
sort of phase two of this, it's like, okay, how do we build these classrooms in such a way where they're working well? And audio is a number one thing, and then the content becomes the second thing, and the
Mm.
ability to interact between the faculty member and the students, regardless of where they are. And then the next thing is students interacting with students, regardless of where they are. So I
Right.
think if you have to solve all of those things in order for it to be an experience, and like I said, like before, it's almost a production, right? Like it's a
Right.
production between multiple different spots, and making sure that people have the tools in order to learn effectively, to teach effectively, and to engage with each other effectively.
Yeah, no, you make a great point. The amount of times that I've gone into a space and I've just been kind of blown away that everything worked exactly as it was, as it was set out to. I think that we especially in vertical like higher education, we try to make do with what we can afford at the time, what we have
Right.
the budget for. And the very real thing is, although wanting to design in these ways is well intentioned, sometimes it's restrictive, right? You really don't have the budget to get it right. And I do think that with the way technology is going, I think that will start to change. I think that it's starting to become more and more affordable. I think at a time where trying to buy a projector for a classroom in say 2014 or 2013, that projector would have been $100,000 to get it to work the way you want it to. Now you have technology that can do it for a fraction of the price. And so we do see that that's starting to change. And I think more and more manufacturers, ourselves included, are starting to design our technology around the higher education vertical, like being purposeful and thoughtful in that sense. And I know that that's very, very important. And, you brought up a bit of a great point earlier, and you mentioned how hybrid or high flex environments create opportunities for access to education that aren't necessarily there for everyone.
Hmm.
And when we talk about inclusivity, a lot of times we think of race and we think of all of these different things, but we hardly ever think about circumstances
Right.
and the circumstances that people are faced with as they wish to pursue higher education and some of the barriers to higher education that are created because of that. And so, can you speak to that a little bit? How technology and how these types of environments create access to those who otherwise wouldn't be able to pursue higher education because of their circumstances.
Yeah, and I think it's even more than access, it creates better outcomes for students.
Mm,
So you're creating better access for people, but you're also creating better outcomes for people. And there's this concept of it's called universal design. And universal design is like designing technology or anything really to think about everybody being included in that, right? So
right.
for instance, I'm not embarrassed to say this, but I always watch TV with closed captioning on because
Mm,
I have found that I take in the content easier and it digests more and I understand it more if I also read the words with it because that's my preferred learning style, right? So, you know, I don't have any sort of hearing impairment or anything like that, but that's the way I learn better or I take in content
sure.
better. And so that's really the thought process behind universal design. And if we think about it from an access standpoint, we're thinking about, you know, people that might have a mental health issue or somebody that might have a neurodiversity issue or things like that, where they can be in a room that has lots of screens and lots of noises and have an issue with that. Like I have
Mm,
one of my daughters is very sensitive to noise. So you think about all the benefits and all the tools available to people that before would have dropped out of school, right? If they couldn't find an alternative way to learn because being in the classroom was too much for them or they weren't learning because of the limitations of the classroom. So you think about the ways that, this really promotes a better student outcome, that they're able to find alternative ways to join a session, whether it be putting on a pair of headphones inside of the classroom and listening to the Teams recording instead of listening to all of the different distractions around the room. Or if you think about um, the mother who has 3 kids they're trying to take care of and has 2 jobs, but they're still trying to learn, it provides another level of access to them. I think about myself when I was getting my PhD. I am a mom of 2 young girls. I work a ton of hours every week, and I had no time to travel anywhere to go to an actual classroom, and I didn't want to because I wanted to spend time with my kids.
right.
I was able to still get a PhD because I was able to take classes from my home instead of actually going to campus. So you think about all of the different students that are impacted by having the flexibility inside of these classrooms, and then it solves so many other problems from a higher education standpoint. Enrollment declines, retention. So think about the impact of the classroom experience on the student outcome that then flows to the financial success of an institution.
Yeah, I can agree with you there because I myself I'm a benefactor of online learning. I'm
Yeah.
currently pursuing my MBA, and much like many of the professionals that I speak to on a daily basis that are also pursuing their MBA online, it was really important for me to be able to go to school and learn, right? Because I
Hmm.
knew that I wanted to take that next step in my life, in my career journey. But it was equally, if not more important, for me to be able to be home with my family, to still be able to do the things that we love to do as a family, and then to work. Right, I couldn't take the time off like a typical MBA and take 2 years of no income to study in a classroom. Like I still needed to be able to work and to function. And so it was really important for me to choose a university that focused on building a community for the
Hmm.
online participant, just as much as their on-campus student base. And when I was researching, that's what I was researching for. And
Mhm.
so that is a direct impact to the bottom line of a university, because if you have students that are searching for these things and your university comes up as a university that's taking those steps, you are 100% going to be on that list of universities for folks to choose. And I myself, I chose University of Illinois, but it's so surprising to me that that type of accessibility isn't necessarily the primary kind of focus for a lot of universities, and it's great to hear that that is the focus at Marshall University. And I've seen it myself, so I totally I totally understand, and I get it. And when it comes to a unique campus like Marshall, and I'm sure this was the case as well at Ohio University, but a unique campus like Marshall, being large, multi-campus university that wanted to ensure that there was connectivity within and collaboration between those multi campuses or multi-site locations. What role did technology play in creating a seamless learning environment across those multiple campuses? Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it was huge, right? So it was a game changer, and I've told the story to quite a few people, but whenever we were selecting the technology that we wanted to put in the Heritage College, I at first was very like, I don't know about this T1B Think Hub technology. I was very hesitant to even go
Yeah.
down there, right? But then seeing
Right.
is believing. And when we went down to Charlotte, seeing is definitely believing. And the one thing that really changed the game for us was that multi-site technology where you could connect different sites into one session of a course or a classroom. So it didn't matter where you were. It didn't matter where you were because you were all connected to that same session. And we did that through the multi-site functionality. And so what was great about that is that before we had multi-site, we would actually have to do you would plan the production. So it was like, okay, at this point in time, we're gonna let Dr. ABC in Dublin do the content sharing. And then at this point, we're going to switch to Athens to do. So everything was very much planned out. And, that really takes away the spontaneity of the pedagogy, right? Like it just doesn't
Right.
allow the teacher to do the teaching effectively. Everything had to be planned out. Questions couldn't be answered. The students didn't understand a topic. Well, it didn't matter if you had a question because we had to then switch the camera shot to another campus.
Mhm.
So this really opened up a whole nother level of student engagement and student success by allowing the teachers to have control and the faculty to have control over when things went back and forth between all of them instead of relying on the tech team to do that. So that was like, I mean, that's the beautiful thing about technology, right? It's like we have ways where I'm a huge fan of like, you do not let technology inhibit what you're doing. It
Mhm.
should it should promote what you're doing, right? And so we have to
Right.
always seek solutions that we're, my president has a saying, it's called finding a way to yes. And then he also says, take friction out of the process. And as a
Mhm.
technologist, that's what I think about all the time. How do I find my way to yes? And how do I take the friction out of the process? And I think that that's what our jobs are as technologists when it comes to faculty and students teaching and learning.
Yeah, yeah, and finding a way to yes, that's a case study in itself, right?
Yeah.
Finding a way to yes, and I think that when I think about technology, especially as a technologist, having never been a professor myself, understanding that from the professor's side of these types of engagements or technology enhancements, it could be a scary thing when you're dealing with new technology, especially when you have a process that you teach with and you're really comfortable within that process. But
Mhm.
we all know that times are changing, and how we administer education and knowledge will also have to shift and change. But I feel like a lot of times when we take on large scale technology projects, especially in higher education, professors have a concern that they'll have to become IT managers
Mhm.
throughout the process. And the last thing they want to do is to have to manage all of these different technical elements and then try to deliver their class session, right? And so for you, what has been one of the ways that you've overcome some of those challenges? And I'm sure you still face them. I'm sure it's still very prevalent in what it is that you all do. But what are some ways that you've overcome that? And what are some ways that technology manufacturers can start to think about designing the technology within these spaces to help kind of solve a bit of that issue or challenge that the professors have?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first things first is you have to have, I think, some trust, right, with the faculty, and you have to build a relationship. So when we were at Marshall University, we built a new school of business, and whenever we first came on and were telling them about the technology that we were going to put in the classroom, there was this, oh my gosh, there's all this, that was that feeling that the faculty had as far as, this is scary, this is different, this is new tech that I'm not used to. And
Right.
and my message to them has always been, you can use as little of this technology as you want, or you can use it as much as you want, but I'm not going to be the reason why you can't do something in the classroom, right? So
Mm,
whenever we installed some of the technology in our new school of business, it's like we want to put the things in there that are going to help you succeed, to help you do active learning, to help you engage with your students. I don't ever want to be the reason why you can't do something in a classroom. But if you
sure.
just want to show your PowerPoint slides that day and that's it, you can do that too. And it's super easy. Let me show you how. And so
Yeah.
I think that that's always been our message with our faculty is like, let's make them comfortable doing the things they're used to doing. And then if they want to grow, the growing is on them. It's not something that we push them into, right?
Right.
So now we've got faculty that say, I can't imagine living out without this technology in the rooms because it's changed the way I teach. I'm dependent on this technology now. So it's you got to really let people sort of understand how it's going to fit into the way their teaching style is.
Sure.
One thing that I've been pretty vocal about is that I really think technology vendors need to have, if they're going to focus on higher education space, they need to have some sort of instructional designer on their team to
Sure.
understand the intersection between technology and teaching,
Mm,
because that is really instructional design is that intersection between, the people. The IT team here does the hardware and the software, but we don't know how to teach. Instructional
right.
designers have a foot in each sort of place. They're technology people that also understand the art of teaching. And so that they
Mm,
can help people bridge the gap of the things they want to teach and then design their instruction from it. So that's what I feel like a lot of problems always arise from is when you're talking to different. I say this because I recently went to Japan and it was sort of like a light bulb moment for me. But when you're your two different languages, you have the way of the technology language and you have the teaching language. And whenever you're talking two different languages, you don't come together, right? But if you've
right.
got that interpreter in the middle, that's what's so important, to have a
Yeah.
fruitful conversation. For
Yeah.
me, I really think that like technology vendors, if they invest in instructional design, I feel like that they would have a lot more success when trying to sort of change the way the classrooms are being built.
Yeah, I mean, so look, if you're listening to this as another manufacturer or a technology professional, the message from Jody is if you're diving into higher education, take it serious. Take it serious.
Yeah.
But I think you phrased that in such a unique way that it really did make me think. Whenever we are engaging in speaking or conversating with someone of another culture or traveling to another place, and there is a language barrier, we do one of two things. We either try our best to learn as much about the language as we can to be conversational
Hmm.
and to truly engage in an insightful way, or we find someone that can help us to translate that message. So I
Hmm.
think that the same should be true for the environments that we interact in, and especially as technologists. It's either have someone on our team, right, that truly understands what it means to teach and what it means to teach with our technology, or have that professional that is able to kind of bridge that gap between the two. So that's an amazing thought process, and it sounds so obvious when you think about it. Like if I say it right now, it sounds so obvious, but I think that for a very long time that hasn't been the case, simply because I think technology operates in so many different silos, and that was really kind of what led me to even starting this podcast is that there's so many different facets of our space that need to come together. And we're developing a technology here for this application, and it just so happens that it could work in this other application. So we toss it in, and then expect the folks on that side to interact and enjoy interacting with it in the way that we think that we've designed it. And there hasn't been much conversation and or collaboration around that piece. And so I agree. I think that is that's the way of the future. And I think that the more and more we have these conversations, the more and more likely it is that is going to start to happen. And so, with that, what do you see as the future of learning and in the future of what these spaces will look like, not just from a technology standpoint, but from a design standpoint in general? Like what do you see being a major kind of change or draw that's going to happen in the higher education space?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things that come to mind, and I think that AI is going to have a huge impact on the way higher education is going forward
Absolutely.
from a personalized learning standpoint, right? So how do I understand more about a student and how they're doing on an individual basis, and then intervene if needed and when needed to really understand and have a better idea of a successful outcome. So I think AI and personalized learning, and so how does that translate into the classroom, right? And that's something
Right.
that I think is really interesting. I think because of AI, I think we're going to see more movement towards active learning and active learning classrooms because, with AI, the traditional lecture anymore becomes sort of, meaningless. They can search that on Chat GPT or Copilot and get the same concepts in like
Right. Yeah.
less than 10 seconds, right? So I think that
Right.
I think teaching is going to move much more into like, okay, here's all your prep content. Now come to class and be ready for active learning, which means group discussion or group work or things like that. And so you're going to have technologies that then are going to be more supportive of that collaborative environment. And so I think that's sort of, I think we're already sort of moving in that direction, but I think we're going to see that more and more as we get more into the use of AI in education. And then the second thing that I think is going to have more is really these skilled learning, workforce learning, stackable micro credentials, access even more to higher
Mm.
education. So really not sticking to the old standard model of higher education that I admit to this university, I get into the program, I take the courses, I get the degree. It's going to be like, okay, I've got this much money and I'm going to take this micro credential. And then over the next how many ever years, I'm going to stack all of these micro credentials and eventually I'll get a degree from it. Like, I think it's just
Hmm.
going to change the way that we think about the things that we're learning, right? And
Right.
the way that they apply in the workforce, especially with the
Yeah.
onset of AI. I mean, it's just going to be so much more focused on critical thinking skills over memorization.
Yeah. I think that I'm seeing it more and more today. And I think you're spot on. And throughout your doctoral research, what was, I guess, kind of one of the biggest surprises or discoveries that you made when it pertained to hybrid and high flex learning? Were there
Mhm.
any like misconceptions that you were able to kind of dispel, or what were some of the more impactful things that you discovered through that process?
It was interesting because, my dissertation was a little bit different. Mine was a manuscript style dissertation, which means
Yeah.
I wrote four different manuscripts that all had like a tie together, but they were all on different topics. And for me, looking back, I can see the way that my thinking had, I don't want to say changed, but my thinking was augmented every time by a different thought process.
Mm.
It really opened my eyes to, opening access to people to learning and just how, we don't think as technology professionals that we have this much impact on the world, but you really think about how everything stacks up and how a classroom design can impact access to students, can impact the financials of a university, that can impact socioeconomic status.
Hmm.
So you think about how those pieces and parts add up, and you think about outcomes, and you think about the different people that you're able to make change their lives because they had access to education and they had access to an equitable educational experience. So, that is what I got excited about throughout my dissertation, is that like I got very passionate about, instead of the cool technology, making a cool technology that we could have hybrid students can have a preference on the way they learned. That became less important for me than opening up a level of access for people that didn't think they had a choice to learn, right?
Wow. Hmm.
So that's what really makes me excited. And that's why I really love working at Marshall University, because our strategy and our sort of creed is Marshall for all, Marshall forever, right? So
Hmm.
we want to be known for who we bring in, not the people that we don't bring in, right? So we want to be inclusive. And I think that that's just how we as technology professionals really think about the way we design our tools and our systems and our classrooms, is how do we make sure that this is accessible to anybody that needs access.
Yeah, no, I love that. Marshall for all. I truly, truly, truly appreciate that insight. I appreciate what Marshall is doing. The focus on inclusive, being inclusive and giving access to those of us who may not have had that access before, and to be so thoughtful in that engagement. So, I think that kind of coming from this, there will likely be an administrator or a professor who is interested in this information and wants to take that back to their university, and ultimately, like anything, may face some roadblocks along the way. If you could kind of leave a piece of advice for that administrator or that professor or that technology professional that is looking to make an impact not only on the lives of their student base, right?
Mhm.
Because that's really what's important here. When you think of it like that, like you're changing a life, like that puts a lot into perspective, but also wants to make an impact on the university and of course the university's bottom line. If you could leave any piece of advice for that person on not only like how to go down the right path of discovery to understand these different environments, but also to approach the university with these types of initiatives,
Mhm.
what advice would you give? Because I'm sure you have some things that you can state there.
Yeah. So I'm a huge fan of, at Marshall University, we have to be very scrappy, right? Like we don't have a lot of resources. So everything that we do, we're being very intentional, very mindful about. So the way that I do a lot of different, anytime I'm doing any sort of change, or I am excited about something and want to see something come to fruition, but it might take $1 million or $50,000 or whatever it might be, right? I
Hmm.
always start with a proof of concept. And I think that that's really the sweet spot, because once you have a proof of concept, and then you have the stories and then the testimonials and the proof and the data to back up why you're doing something, that's a
Sure.
whole different story than just saying, my opinion says this and research says this and best practice says this, because that is not something that people want to invest a lot of money in. So it's hard to get
Sure.
that. But if you do a proof of concept and or a pilot and say, this is what we did. Now we want to try this with, so let's say one classroom. We did it with one classroom. This was the outcome of this proof of concept with one classroom. Now we want to try this with 5 classrooms. You get the funding for 5. You do it with 5 classrooms. Now we see these outcomes. Let's try this with 10 more class. And then over time, you have just transformed the institution, right? So
Right. Right.
it's just like, I've been at Marshall now 3 years, and we started things a year ago, and now we're 3 years in, and I'm like, how did all of that happen? So
Right.
don't feel like you have to like, I always tell people, eat the elephant one bite at a time. Like that's really, you
Yeah.
just start somewhere, and keep rolling that ball and making it bigger, and getting the outcomes that you want, and measure everything. Measure things so
Measure
people under
everything.
measure everything, make sure you understand the impact it's having and the return on the investment.
All right. Well, look, measure everything. I think that phrase itself is something to walk away from.
Yeah.
To walk away from this episode with. Jodie, truly, truly appreciate you. Truly appreciate the time that you took to spend with us here on the Build Together podcast, and truly an inspiration. And thank you so much for your time today, and thank you so much for leaving our listeners with something actionable to take into their active learning environments.
Awesome. Thank you, Xavier. It's been a pleasure.